everyone. This is Sophia Smallstorm. I was invited to create a podcast discussion. I'm joined by three people whom I have lots of respect for and friendship with, and they're all really great people. They are brave. They are putting themselves out there in risky and innovative ways. And I will introduce them now. There's David Weiss, there's Mike Williams, also known as the Sage of Quay, and there's Jeran, who has a YouTube channel, Jeranism. And what we're going to talk about today is this flat earth topic. I was asked to join this discussion because I have had questions that I've posed to David, and some of these questions don't have easy answers. So that's where we're going to go today. We're going to have what we hope will be an organic exchange of views and discoveries, not necessarily made by us. Some might be made by other people, but we're going to kind of flesh out this flat earth thing, not going into the basics, but rather going into different corners and crannies that have come up for each of us. And let's just proceed and see where this takes us. And I guess I should start out with a question. So one of the things that I'm fascinated by is this. If the flat earth is like a dinner plate, and if the sun circles from the Tropic of Cancer out in a spiral, 24 hours for each spiral, and then it reaches the Tropic of Capricorn, when it gets farther out in its spirals, it's still completing the spiral in 24 hours because we're still having this cycle of day and night. And so when it's at the Tropic of Capricorn, in what we call the southern hemisphere, the ball earthers call that the southern hemisphere, it's got to be traveling very, very fast to do its 24-hour cycle. Is that right?
In the flat earth model, that does make sense. And I have some theories on that.
I'll just say as well that if you talk to people who live down in the South, Australia or South America, they all report a very quick sunset or what we would call dusk. Basically, in the North, we get the sun sets and then we see for another hour or so. It's still pretty bright outside. It doesn't get dark very quickly. But from what I've heard from everybody who lives in the South, that's not the same that they see. They see the sunset and they get maybe 10 minutes of extra light and then it's just dark. So that would be the case if the sun was moving much quicker in the South.
So you're telling me, this is very interesting because I didn't know this, that twilight then, meaning not approaching sunset, but the twilight that follows, the evening light is much shorter in duration in what we call the southern hemisphere conventionally. Wow, that's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and if anybody who lives in the South or would love to tape that and put it up on YouTube or something, it would be very helpful just seeing if because I've only heard that from people, but it would be great to see and actually to measure and do an experiment and see if what is that difference in time.
Let me just jump back a little bit for those of you that are struggling with the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer and Sophia's dinner plate analogy. We don't believe that the Earth is a disk, a dinner plate floating in infinite space. But as far as the place we call Earth, you can look at it like a dinner plate where the North Pole is at the center. The equator is halfway out to the outside, and then halfway to the middle is the Tropic of Cancer, and halfway from the equator to the outer edge is the Tropic of Capricorn. And the sun spirals in between those two, making bigger circles in the outer southern hemiplanes summer and during our winter, and then comes back in tighter and slower, still making 360. And that's how night and day happens. My sister and her family just got back from Johannesburg, and she doesn't know that I'm a flat earther, but she mentioned how the sun set and it was dark instantly.
Now, can I ask, would it have to be higher as well?
So that is something that I was looking at. I believe that the sun goes faster and higher. This is my belief. It makes sense in the flat Earth model that I subscribe to. It's higher and faster in the outer southern plane, which because if it stayed low, they would have a very short day and a very long night. But if it's higher, that would explain how their days, can be much longer. Jeran, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that. I thought that it was actually lower. And I based that off of the globe belief that during the South summer, the sun is much, much closer. In their belief, it's 3 million miles closer than it is during our summer. So I take that to mean that it is closer to the Earth during their summer versus ours. But 3% of 93 million is only, 3 million miles of 93. Let's put that at 3%. It's not going to be a whole lot lower or higher, meaning if let's say that we put the sun at 100 miles from us, that means it's a difference between 100 miles in the north and 97 in the south. So we're not talking about a huge difference of whether it's higher or lower.
Yeah, well, you're taking the fact that the heliocentric model says during the southern summer, our winter, the sun is actually closer to the ball model. I don't put that together with the flat Earth model at all.
Well, I would just assume that they measure that at least, optically. So, for instance, they talk about the apparent size of the sun. And it ranges, and I don't know the exact number. I think it's 51 to 53. It measures being bigger during the South summer. That's part of the reason they say it's actually closer. But you're right, and I don't have any kind of hard evidence on that to say. But at the spiral pattern that I think of, I do think that the sun is higher in the northern summer, because somebody in, say, Fairbanks, Alaska, or those kind of places, when they see the 24-hour sun, I'm assuming that it's higher for them to be able to see it above the horizon. My sister-in-law lives in Australia, and she said that the sun feels closer, like in Australia, and she lived here her whole life. She just moved there last year, and says that the sun feels closer and hotter in Australia than it did here, which is, we live in Monterey, so it's on the beach, and we definitely get good sun for the summer. She said that also that she gets sunburnt faster. So that's kind of what led me to my idea, thinking that the spiraling of the sun is higher at the northern summer and lower, so closer to the Earth. But also, like I said, my personal opinion is that the sun could be 60 miles away from us. So if it is that 60 miles, then we're only really talking about a 3% difference between north and south. So, 3% of 60 is like what, 2? So, I mean, you're talking about the difference between 60 miles and 58. So, just something I haven't looked into enough to say definitively one way or the other. So David could be right. I don't know what the answer would be to that.
Without diving too deep into this, because this is one of the more complicated things to figure out, we're not actually talking about the real position of the sun, because we all see the sun in what we call an apparent position of the sun. There's a YouTuber by the name of Dr. Zach that did a great video on it. Maybe Mike can link that in the description here. That you really need to study these things, because there's a lot of options. Some people say, well, that doesn't work, therefore the Earth is a ball. Well, no, there's 50 different ways to look at it, and you have to figure out which one is exactly right.
I have a question for Jeran.
Sure.
How do you come upon the 60-mile calculation?
Just based optically, really. Been looking at a lot of footage of the balloon launches, and the balloons that I've seen get up to about 100 or 120,000 feet, which is about 20 miles, and I don't ever see the sun appear to be much higher than 2 or 3 times the size or the height of that balloon. And we get a hot spot on the Earth, which is telling me that the sun is right above the Earth. It's not out some distance away, 93 million miles. And that's the only reason I come up with that particular number. I don't think it's very, very large. It's not, it's not a million times the size of the Earth, in my opinion. So as far as measuring it, though, I don't think it's something that can be necessarily measured Like we think of measuring things like triangulation, because I do think it's like David was saying, he calls it an apparent sun. I think it's a reflection of sorts, and I don't think you can't measure the distance to a reflection.
I saw a video from Dr. Zach where what he did was he took mainstream science variables and he put it into his AutoCAD program, and he didn't come up with 60 miles, but what he came up with was the 3,000 mile marker, if you will, which is a number that I've heard many, many times in the flat earth community, that the sun is no more than 3,000 miles away. So it could be less. That was a pretty good piece of work, I thought, that he did.
But he pointed out that it's difficult to triangulate it because from each position that you're in, the sun is in a different position.
Yes.
Therefore, it doesn't work. So when we say, Jeran and I were talking earlier, we think the sun is between 3,000 and 50 miles, somewhere in between there. Compare that to 93 million. That's not much of a variable at all. Before we get off the spiraling of the sun, something Sophia had pointed out, maybe she can talk about it a little more, is that the sunrise and sunset as we approach the winter solstice changes. It doesn't, the sunrise and sunset don't move equally. And what that says is that something is changing speed. And we can know that it's not the Earth's rotation that is changing speed because we would feel that. Sophia, you want to comment?
Yeah, I call this sunrise sunset creep, and it was actually an older lifeguard who made it known to me last year as I was anticipating December 21st when the days would get longer and we wouldn't have these hellish dark nights starting at 4:30, which does happen here in Southern California also, even though people think it's always light and sunny. And he told me, he said, no, you're starting to get longer evenings already by basically the first week of December. And I said, what? And he said, yes. And so I ran to get my tide book from my car, and I looked, and he told me at the same time he was describing that, he said that the sunrise continues to happen later and later in the mornings until about January. He said the week of the 7th, January 7th. And I looked this up. I looked it up for all the different parts of the world, these almanacs for sunrise and sunset, and by golly, he was right. So we start having longer evenings. It's about the 11th, 12th of December, and yet the sunrise continues to be later and later every morning until the 11th, 12th of January. And the same for June and July, by the way, around the summer solstice. So the winter solstice, yes, it's true that in terms of sheer hours, the days are shortest and the nights longest on December 21st and the reverse on June 21st. But the creep begins on the 12th, 13th, between the 11th and the 13th. It's somewhere around there. And that is across the entire Earth. Any almanac will show that. And I figured that there must be some kind of bump going on. And when I talked to Bob and Cammie, we discussed this, and they were looking at magnetic lines, flux lines or some such thing, and they felt that the bump had, when the sun goes through a wobble in that time period and then it starts adjusting, that it had something to do with that. But this is where I get to my analogy of a dog looking at his reflection in the mirror and then not wanting to look because it's too difficult to figure out.
The way I see it is the sun is speeding up and slowing down as it increases its circle and decreases, and it just falls out of sync with the full day as it's speeding up, and then it has to, speeding up is steady, is a steady ramp, but then when it has to start slowing down, there's your bump, and that shows you that something is changing speed, and it has to be the sun.
Is there an explanation that the heliocentrists put forth that explains this?
Not that I know of.
I do not, and I tried bringing this up to ball earthers, and they just looked at me blankly. Of course, they weren't well versed in the ball earth, but there is something. You should be able to explain this somehow, and you can somewhat explain it with the flat earth model, the way David has attempted. But you can't explain it at all on the ball Earth model, not at all. And yet it's a reality. Everybody who knows the water, knows the land, I bet you farmers know this, sailors know it. Salt of the earth people who traditionally make their livings or enjoy hobbies and sports connected to the outdoors, who get up really early and are out, on the seas at all hours, they know this kind of thing. This is well known, and it can be proven simply by, you can look it up on almanacs anywhere. I looked it up for Perth, Australia, for different parts of the world, and it's everywhere. Of course, I just wanted to verify that it wasn't just my tide calendar that had printed it up this way.
I have a question, if you guys don't mind. One that I've seen a lot of discussion about, and David, I know that, and maybe Jeran yourself also, have taken a lot of heat for, but the question from the globe community would be that if the sun is truly moving away from the stationary Earth, and we're talking about sunset, then why does the sun not appear to get smaller as it approaches the horizon, or even at times it appears to actually look larger? What is going on there? I mean, is the sun actually getting smaller as it moves away from us? Because that's a very, very heated discussion, and there's a lot of folks on the heliocentric side that will say that, we're just a bunch of kooks who are even talking about the sun getting smaller. It just doesn't happen.
Jeran, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, if you're talking about optically, I think you can go to YouTube and just look up many different sunsets, and you can clearly see that if you really are looking at that sunset, that the sun appears to be going away from you. It appears to be getting smaller. It's quite apparent to me. If you're talking about looking through a solar filter, the sun is much, much smaller than we see it in the sky. When you look through a solar filter, it actually looks extremely tiny. And I think when people are doing measurements, they're showing that actual disk, or that actual, well, they would call it a ball, but they think that it remains the same size throughout the entire day, which may be true. But I think that what we see is clearly, has to do with the atmosphere around us. And when the sun is setting, obviously, for me at least, I live by the beach. So when I see the sunset, it is setting behind multiple layers of atmosphere, which causes atmospheric lensing, which is going to cause it to look bigger. So when it sets, is it getting smaller, but at the same time going through more atmosphere? So you're getting kind of a double end thing where it's getting smaller, but you're seeing it bigger. But as far as, I think it does remain pretty close to the same size if you put a solar filter on your camera or on your telescope, at least from the experiments I've seen.
So Rob Skiba did some amazing work where he demonstrated that there is what he calls atmospheric lensing that does increase the sun. So it's a beautiful balance. As the sun is going away and getting smaller, it's also getting magnified. But there's different conditions in different places. Most of us see sunsets in moist areas, over water, over moist, lush land. But there's a bunch of videos now. The first one I found was over the African plain, where the sun was setting over a dry African plain, and you could watch the sun that turns into a little pin dot before it finally gets eclipsed by too much clouds or atmospheric blocking, I call it. There's now dozens or hundreds of other videos where you can see the sun traveling across the land, getting smaller without that lensing going on. There's some in Alaska where it was nice dry, where you could see the sun and the moon doing the same thing, shrinking as they go into the distance.
I just wanted to mention this as an aside. It's difficult in our part of the world to be on a flat plane and really see much in this regard because of the amount of chemtrail mess. I call it a chem bank. When I crossed the desert in Arizona and New Mexico in 1987, I could not believe the sunset. Of course, I didn't know to look for the sun as a pinprick disappearing. But when I crossed the desert again 20 years later, you couldn't see a thing on the horizon. It was all this awful obscurity, this gray, misty stuff. And so it's going to be hard. If you could go to Africa and look there, or go to various, the desert in other parts of the world. But here, you can't do it anymore. Just wanted to throw that in.
No, that's a very good point. And what I was going to mention, Sophia, and oppose this to David and to Jeran also, is that I think that when we talk about folks saying that the sun doesn't get smaller, going back to that for a second, the problem is that the runway of visibility that people have when they make that statement, most people, they don't have. When they look up at the sky, they can see for so far, and then you've got trees, you've got mountains, you've got houses, you've got all that stuff. And of course, you have a very, very short span of runway in which you can view the sun. And of course, in that short runway, the sun is not going to look smaller, right? However, if you were someplace, let's say where you had visibility for 10 miles or so, setting aside chemtrails and all that stuff, that in all likelihood, you would see a change in the size of the sun because you're seeing it over a broader span of distance, and you can see it getting smaller. I mean, does that sound reasonable?
It does. What people don't realize is anything that's above your eyeball level, even in the distance, will eclipse the sun. You know, if when you look, you know, at the city skyline, like New York City is about 30 miles from me, I could see it over the water. It's literally level with my eyes, but the sun gets eclipsed behind the buildings of New York as it moves away. And, you know, we're told that the ball's spinning and that's why it's going down. And you could, of course, believe that, but you're just not trusting what your eyes are seeing.
Absolutely. And I'll even say something crazier that my wife and I, who grew up here by the coast, we both remember seeing the sunset on the water. It's something we've seen many times before. And ever since we started looking into this, going to the beach, trying to film the sunset, we've realized that it no longer happens that way. There's like a layer of gunk clouds. It looks like fake clouds, but there's like a layer of fog almost that sits on the horizon and the sun sets behind it. So we no longer, and we've been numerous times, and we've just realized that's what is there every day. So I actually tend to think the idea of chemtrails makes more sense to me to be blocking our ability to see far, to see sunsets, because it never made sense to me that are they really trying to poison me when they're living in the same air that I am. So, their family lives in the same air that we do. And, I've heard a lot of different people give excuses for why they think that could still be the case, but I think it makes more sense that they are attempting to stop us from seeing what, maybe they don't want us to see. So if you ever, I don't know about you, Sophia, I know you live, near LA. When you go to the beach, do you see the sunset on the water? Does it actually, the actual disk of the sun hits the ocean?
Jeran, I live in San Diego County, and the sun goes down over the water, but I frequently see what you are talking about, the line of dark smudge. We call it smog from LA, but it's often chembank. And sometimes it's water, moisture off the ocean. There are many different conditions that can be cofactors in it. But in recent years, there's been so much obscurity on the horizon because you're looking through so much of it. And I've always called it chembank. I think that came from my studies of chemtrails back in around 2005. But I also want to mention what has happened very often here in California, at least where I live, and many, many people have remarked on it, that when the sun sets, as it starts to disappear, recede, quote unquote, below the horizon, it's no longer a circle. It is an octagon or hexagon. It actually it's amazing. It's mind-blowing, eye-popping. And I've heard regular people comment about this as well, that the sun is not, you're not looking at the conventional circle or half circle. You're looking at a geometric configuration with clear, straight lines. And I don't know if that's some kind of optical effect or something has happened to the sun. Who knows? I've heard people say, what? Look at that. And so it's a very common phenomenon here for us.
You only see that at sunset then? You don't see that, say, an hour before or 2 hours before?
No, it's right when it starts to sink. I'm talking in conventional terms.
Right.
A lot of people wait for the green flash. Are you familiar with the green flash?
Yeah, my wife said she saw it many times as a child. They used to go for a youth group and go and try and watch it, and it's impossible to see now because we don't see the sun even touch the water anymore.
What is the green flash?
The green flash, I have my own 2-cent explanation for it, but it's very popular among sunset watchers. As the sun, I'm going to speak in the conventional terms, as the sun descends and gets lower and lower and lower on the horizon, this is the ocean in particular, everybody stares like hell because they want to see it actually disappear. And in that last moment, when there's that last speck of it showing, now it's a teeny pinprick, which we are, in conventional terms, assuming as well it's going over the side of the earth, the edge of the earth. But that last speck of light gives a big green flash. And it's a brilliant green, like a peppermint green. And it's shocking and enthralling and exhilarating, and everybody feels lucky when they see it. And I've seen it while my friend was looking away, and I said, "Oh, you missed it. There was a green flash." But we still see it, and my theory for why it happens is the light spectrum bending, because if you take, as you lose from both ends of the spectrum, the red end and the ultraviolet end, violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, if you fold that 7-color spectrum, which is, of course, just a simplification of what it is, visible light, right in the middle is green. So green is the last color to remain at dusk. And this is why I read in my research years ago that the Department of Transportation makes the street signs and the highway signs green and white, because you will always see green, even though it will be harder to see blue or red as the light fades. So the green is when you bend that spectrum. Green is smack in the middle, and there's something about the light spectrum bending, and boom, you get the green flash. That's my theory.
I have to say I've never seen it.
I saw it once while I was driving in my car. I just happened to be driving up Highway 101. I watched the sunset as closely as I could, and bing, there was a green flash right while I was driving.
David, have you ever seen it? I think I haven't seen it because I've never lived in areas where I can actually see the sun, let's say sunset over the ocean. I've always been in areas where I wasn't very close to the water. In fact, right now I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm 2 hours from the coast, so I'm still not going to see something like that.
Right. I'm on the Long Island Sound, so even though, the land is in the distance, it's going behind the land eventually. I did sail across the ocean once, and there was a lot of big waves, but the sun did go very far away before it set. It was, it was light for a very long time after sunset on the ocean.
Well, we have that too, and the ocean is reflective. So I live on a canyon, and there's hills to the east. And so what I see in the evening, if I leave the beach is light, and as I head home inland a little bit, the ambient light is less and less, and it becomes darker and darker. But I will see reflected on the hillside in the summer, in those late evenings, all the light that's coming from the west, from the ocean. So there's a lot of reflection, I think, as well. But I wanted to, if I could take us back to the dinner plate, because I came upon something else that I thought was curious that has to do with human settling, population, habitats, and so forth. So if you look at the dinner plate and you see the continental cluster, the land cluster, and you look at where the outer tropic is, Capricorn, that runs over the tips of 3 continents, Africa, South America, and Australia. And traditionally, there hasn't been a lot of human population there. In more recent decades, there has been the settling of Australia with prison population from Britain, and then South Africa, there were migrations of Nordic Europeans to South Africa. And then there was a sparse population living in the southern part of South America. But in Africa, it had been Bushmen and the, natives of that region. And Australia was just, as we know, Aborigines, Maoris, very scant population numbers. And I wondered if that was because there was something that human biology had to have a tolerance for to live in that kind of environment, given the light factor and given the behavior and presence and speed of the sun, that it wasn't optimal for biology, which is why we had population clustering closer to the equator and the Cancer tropic. Of course, we've got the land masses there also, and I can't explain why that happens to be the case, but it seemed like the more remote areas toward the Capricorn tropic were just maybe more challenging and rugged and harsh for whatever reason. So I don't know if anyone has a comment on that.
I don't know. Maybe modes of transportation just got, they were a lot better, a lot safer. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts?
Well, I would like to say that there were excursions that populated those areas, and they were deliberate. There was an offloading in the case, if the penal colonies are the correct historical reason for the settlement of Australia. There was an offloading of a particular kind of population to that region, and then South Africa, the Boers went there. They were fleeing Europe, and there was a migration of other people going there. And then, of course, there was the whole resource element to Africa being such a resource-rich continent that it drew all kinds of people from more settled areas of the world, developed areas of the world. But South America is sparse anyway, and we had, again, excursions to South America. And so the populations that are the majority in those areas now are not native, and the native populations that began there were not great in numbers. So there must be some kind of biological tolerance that is needed, and most people in the world didn't have it. Now, I have been studying vitamin D as well, and one of my theories about the population exchange that we're seeing today, I don't mean to go astray too far off the mark here, but what we're seeing flood into Europe from Africa, dark-skinned people, and from Asia, and these people are settling in places like Sweden and Germany and Holland and Denmark, and we are seeing it in America as well. We've had, the slave populations coming from Africa and then migrating from the lower latitudes in America once the freedom of slavery was achieved into cities in the north. And you're going to see, because of the inability for these dark pigmented people to obtain enough sunlight and vitamin D in order to keep their biological metabolism going in the way that it has to. Because of the diminished sunlight in the northern regions, we're going to see horrible health problems. And I believe that one reason that so many black people who live in inner cities in like Chicago are not in good health is because they just don't have enough sunlight, and they cannot make their body work the way it needs to.
So you're saying, Sophia, that their bodies were specific to a certain region or geography, and having been taken away from that geography or that region, now that they're going to have physical ailments or health implications because the degree of sunlight that they had south of the equator is the volume of sunlight that they needed in order to be healthy, and then as they go north, that's going to be a problem? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. If you live north of Atlanta, Georgia, you will not even make vitamin D in your body between November and February. The sun is just not present enough. It's too far. The flashlight is too far away. So that's when what we call the southern hemisphere gets its dose of sunlight, right? But when people who are accustomed to living in the tropics, whose need for sun exposure is so much greater than people who live in the north. For instance, a very fair-skinned person, all they need, the photobiologists tell us, is 15 minutes a day in the sun, and they can make plenty of vitamin D and get along just fine. But dark people who are Asian, South Asian, Indian, African American, the darker your skin is, the more sunlight you need in order to you have to make gobs of vitamin D to keep your body going. So you don't do well in a northern latitude if you have very dark skin. And this is why people not only have the seasonal affective disorder, but they actually have biological failure. And the obesity rate of people who are living in inner cities who are dark skinned, this is just my observation, is just going off the charts. Diabetes, obesity, and obeseness means you are toxic. Your body is piling on just volumes of adipose tissue in which to dump toxins that your organs can't filter out fast enough. So there is a definite health factor, and that's what made me start thinking about, well, when you live in Australia and bottom of Africa and bottom of South America, there aren't that many people who are living there. Why does human biology favor the upper latitudes?
Okay, but that could be an argument either way from a flat Earth or a globe perspective, right? Am I wrong?
No, sure. But to me, it's all artificial, this settling of those nether regions or those outer regions.
So what would you think the motivations are for doing that?
Well, offloading of certain populations and then, obtaining the benefits of farming the resources. Managing the resources would be one. I think that it's interesting. I had my theory about the Ice Age. Now, everybody's going to hear my really weird theories. I'm looking at a dinner plate picture. So the North Pole is in the center. And I'm going to kind of give the sun a mind of its own. So the sun started when everything was ice. This is a once upon a time Sophia story, okay? So forgive it if it sounds ridiculous. But anyway, the sun started over the North Pole. That's where it started to melt. And it melted. It was circling, small circles, and it melted the ice. And boom, water appeared. And then it melted some more ice, and maybe land appeared. And it had some directive to keep moving out, melting more ice. And remember, we have these tales of how Greenland was green. I mean, Greenland had grapevines and farming, and so the Arctic area of the world that's now frozen over was not that way once upon a time. And then the sun was given orders, now again, you have to excuse the way this sounds, to move farther out. Hey, we need more landmass. You keep moving out there, melt more. So the sun made bigger and bigger sweeps, and it had to go farther and farther out. And so here's my little 2-cent theory. That's how we got the Ice Age. Because it had to leave behind where it had melted and concentrate on melting farther out. And so those areas became lush and green, and we had an Ice Age in the section where it had originally started.
No, it almost sounds like a way in which, if you think in terms of this being a pond, almost a way in which it was able to form the pond. I'm thinking, as you're explaining this, I'm thinking, well, maybe the whole thing was just a sheet of ice at one time. And then the sun, boom, and it starts doing its thing. And as it starts doing its thing, like you're saying, it's melting. And then water is flowing, and then land is exposed, and so on. I mean, I don't know. That was just some of the thought I had as you were explaining it.
I was actually going to do an experiment to show people how I believe the flat Earth that we live on was created. And I was going to get a large area of my yard and build like a little hockey rink, like a foot or 2 foot deep, fill it with water, throw rocks in there everywhere, and have it freeze over. And then just get a heat lamp and hang a heat lamp over and melt out a puddle. And you could swing that lamp in a circle if I could find a way just to make it keep circling around. And you would literally you would create a pond, expose these rocks. And that's my belief on where we live. Are we the only pond? I don't think so. I have no proof that there's other ponds out there. But that's how I see it. Jeran?
I think that sounds fantastic. I would love to see that experiment. And Sophia, I don't think what you said was stupid at all. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you don't look at the Earth as being 4.54 billion years old.
Well, it's not any crazier than the Big Bang.
Certainly not.
Nothing,
Right?
Nothing could be crazier than the Big Bang. Once there was nothing and it exploded, and now there's everything. That's what heliocentrists believe. I mean, they don't even know what they believe, because if they did, they wouldn't believe it.
And they go around making fun of creationists when they believe in a creation. It's the same thing.
I have a question, if you guys don't mind. This is something that I haven't figured out. I really haven't seen any material which has satisfied my inquisitiveness about it. But how do the eclipses work?
Jeran's got this one nailed.
Yeah, I got this one down. No, I'm looking forward to seeing my first one, or my first solar eclipse, coming in August. So until I can see it myself, I definitely have problems with eclipses. Not problems with how they work, just problems with what we're given as evidence of them. As far as the eclipses in flat Earth, they could work the same way as they do on the globe, especially the solar eclipse. And the lunar eclipse, I think that there's definitely some examples of the lunar eclipse taking place. What do they call it? A solenion? I can't really pronounce that word. It's the rare occasion, I guess they say, which has happened like 50 times since the mid 1800s, I believe, when there was a lunar eclipse when both the sun and the moon were above the horizon. So if that's the case, all I need to, really do is witness one of those, and that disproves the idea of the Earth getting in between the sun and the moon, causing the lunar eclipse. There is something, at least from what I've seen, that does cause a shadow on the moon. But I've also seen numerous images of lots of things that are casting a shadow that extends far enough on in the sky to reach the moon. And it could be, I've seen it, rocket shuttles, smoke cloud has reached the moon. Sometimes you see mountains when the sun's going past them, you'll see this shadow cast up onto the sky, and it kind of angles down away from you. And any of those things would eventually hit the moon if it was on the horizon, causing a so-called eclipse, especially when you talk about the idea of it being red and we get that low red haze. Could be simply just atmospheric effects. So I can't tell you the answer to that, though.
Okay, I know it's a tough one. Like I said, I haven't really seen anything that has satisfied, like I said, my questioning of how an eclipse works. I know that in Hindu mythology we have Rahu saying that there's actually another cosmic sphere, if you will, or so in other words, what they're saying is another celestial body that actually moves in front of the sun, as an example, and blocks it out. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
We don't know. We don't have proof of that. It would be difficult to prove. We don't even know where the light of the moon is coming from. It is clearly not reflected sunlight. You can't reproduce it in an experiment, shining light on a rock and have it, cast a shadow back at you. The moon does throw its own light. I think Jeran and I are both of the same opinion that it is getting its light from the sun, from the energy of the sun, just like a bank of LED lights would light up with a Tesla coil across the room. And as you move that Tesla coil, different parts would light up. Perhaps the eclipse has something to do with blocking the sun's energy, and the moon is literally just blacking out.
Yeah. Okay. So it just seems like that's something that needs to be researched further. The whole mainstream science explanation of this sounds okay until you have both the sun and the moon in the sky at the same time. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, right?
It doesn't work in the heliocentric model. We don't even know if the sun and the moon are solid objects or not. If they are, it could work on the flat Earth model the same way it does in the heliocentric model. But there's so much unknown. We don't have access to it. And, we don't know the answer. And other people go, you don't know the answer, ball Earth. I drive my car down the road. I don't know how it works, but it's a car. I could tell you it has wheels and it's burning diesel fuel and it's doing all of these things, but I can't explain the rest of it, but it's a car.
Yeah, it's not binary. And you're exactly right, David. That's how people respond. It's that knee-jerk reaction, which says, well, because you don't know, henceforth, it's got to be this. It's got to be the heliocentric explanation, and that's just not the case. So anyway, I don't want to dominate this. Sophia, I know you have more questions.
I do. And again, I always think from a perspective of biology, because I really like rooting my thinking there. So when we go to the trophic chain, which is the food chain, the critters at the very bottom are called the producers, and they require light, sunlight, to make their food. They don't go out and gather or hunt food. Plants make food out of light. So I was thinking as you all were talking about how the sun and the moon could actually be chargers for what we need the most to thrive here, the life forms here, which are all light dependent. And the moon and the sun give off very different kinds of light. The moon may have a reflected light, but let's not think of them as solid objects under which we live, but rather as the source of the energy that we need to live. And they have their various jobs. I mean, they're split between that 24-hour cycle. We've got the warm golden rays of the sun, which we need, all of us, everything that lives here needs it. And then the sun disappears because it has to go heat up other parts of the dinner plate. And we have decomposers that are on the very other end of the food chain. They're also called detritivores, the fungus and bacteria and small microorganisms that break everything down and render it into nutrients to feed the daytime cycle again and the life that thrives and occurs in that time. So it just fascinates me that this whole thing here is light. It's all about light. And the sun and the moon give us two different kinds of light.
Well, this goes to the show, Sophia, that you and I talked about sepsis, the sepsis agenda, where the moonlight is a light that does not foster life, if you will. It's septic. Right.
It promotes degeneration and putrefaction and breakdown. But we need it because there are life forms. Life forms only live so long, and then they need to be broken down and to be recycled. And so the sun and the moon, particularly the sun, it's this source of electrons. I mean, where everything is electrical, life on the cellular level is the exchange of electricity, the uptake of electrons, and then the use of those in performing metabolism. And we are constantly needing new electrons. And what I find very interesting is that everything depends on the surface of the earth. This concept of gravity, if it is truly density, which makes all kinds of sense, then things are drawn to the surface of the earth. And I'm wondering if there's the negative charge, again, in the conventional explanation, the electrons that run through the ground where they're conducted by the materials, the conductive materials in the topography of the earth, which would be minerals and water. Those electrons their origination is supposedly bolts of lightning. Lightning strikes the earth 200 times a second all over the place. And these lightning strikes create flow of electrons that are now a life stimulus, and everything alive absolutely depends on them. And an aside, but a very important by the way, is that modern life has insulated us in rubber shoes and taken us off the ground, and this is why we're dying. We are decomposing. This is the sepsis agenda. Very high rates of degenerative disease. So this concept of light and how much we need it, and that the world is it's lit up half of each day, and the sun is the source of it.
No, I mean, the sun is the giver of life. And we talked about this a little bit, well, actually a lot, in one of our shows where, going back to, we talked about the chemtrails before, where maybe one of the intentions of chemtrails also is to block out the sun so that the septic light or the septic environment is prolonged.
Exactly, and this is the whole Harvard development, the David Keith and Harvard University coming out in favor of solar geoengineering to deflect sunlight. This is going to push the biological darkness and sepsis agenda. So what if the sun, I mean, those people who believe in God and the creative force, I don't know how to describe that creative force myself, but the sun, when it got its original orders, it was told, start here and start melting. And this is just my little story again. And then it was told, now go out, melt some more. We need more land. We need to produce this thing called life. And you need to be there. You need to be spreading yourself around this dinner plate so that this thing called life can happen and can grow and can bloom and can thrive. And now the agendas that are working to controvert all of this are working deliberately to reduce our ability to thrive and produce what we need in this sunlight. We are getting assaults from all levels, but they're causing us to collapse and degenerate. So this is the biological darkness degeneration agenda. But this thing called the sun is all about light. And maybe being here, maybe we're in a dimension where we experience baking and roasting every day so that we can move around and chatter and discuss things and build things and make things and create more of us.
Well, and I'll ask this question, Sophia, to David and Jeran, because that ties in, I think, nicely with why is the sun then the focus of the heliocentric model? In other words, there's a reason why they're focusing on it. And some people will say, well, the reason why they have the heliocentric model is so that it just basically solidifies the lie. But is it really just that, or is it, David and Jeran, can it be based in an esoteric theology, a belief system, if you will, that really has nothing to do with science? I know, Jeran, you've many times have done videos on this where it's a religion, it's not real science. So when we talk about the sun, and we talk about the sun being the focal point of the heliocentric model, we revolve around the sun, and everything is about the sun and the many suns, the stars throughout the cosmos. Is it theology? I mean, is it really a religion at the end of the day? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the whole veiled religious beliefs that they have is essentially, like you said, masked astrotheology, that the sun is the life giver. I mean, it's no accident that the Son of God is the same sounding as the sun in the sky, that, Jesus is the sun, and the sun, it's the same thing. And when you talk about the Lucifer, the light bringer, a lot of people think that the Masons and things like that worship Lucifer or the devil, but really what they're doing is they've just kind of fooled people, and they worship the sun, the light bringer, and just all the things that Jesus does. When you talk about the sun walks on water, if you kind of picture the sun setting in the way that reflection is in the water, there's a lot of things that mirror the actual sun in the sky versus the sun in the Bible, the Son of God. So, I do think that they do worship the sun, the sun god. I mean, just when you look at Israel, and which is just a separation of Ra, El, Isis is the light bringer, and Ra is the sun, and El is God. So it's like the wisdom bringer, the son of God. We are the people. That's what Israel is. That's where it got that name, and why they think that they're God's people. So, I mean, if that's what you're asking, it's pretty clear. A lot of people have shown that the Bible is just or not just but inside the Bible is a masked story of the zodiac.
It's astrotheology, yeah.
Right. You can go through each of the houses and go through each of the 12, and it's kind of a story of Jesus's life. So yeah, that's definitely the case, at least in my opinion. So it is their religion, and ultimately, yeah, science cannot ever put the earth at the center, even if all the observations show us that, which they, for the most part, do. It's not something that science can venture into that land, because the next question, if we are the center of the universe, would be why, or who put us here, or what are we doing here? And those are questions science is not equipped to answer. They don't give anything purpose. So there can be no purpose to where we are in the universe. So they have to put us as one of the many galaxies, many planets out there rotating one of the many suns. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see what we're given with science, because they have no other option. It's not as if even though we wouldn't need dark energy, we wouldn't need dark matter, all those things would not be needed if they just admitted that we're the center of the universe. And they can't admit that, like I said, because science is about things that they can prove, and they certainly don't want any outside entity having anything to do with, Sophia's telling a great story, but that's certainly, even if it was anywhere near correct, science isn't going to look at it, because what she's describing is purpose, that there's a purpose to the sun, that it had directions, it was given direction, it was told what to do. And so science won't dare go anywhere near that. They have to create for us a system that works as an accident, that this is just all accidental. The sun goes here because we're spinning around and we go around the sun. And yeah, it all is lacking that one thing that you would need to call something science, and that's evidence and proof. I don't have any evidence that the sun is 1.3 million times the size of the earth. I don't know anybody who does.
Yeah.
Science can ignore things that are put right in front of them, and people will just buy it. Oh, scientists said that. It's more of scientism, where it's just a belief system. Just going back to when we were talking about eclipses and stuff, if you think about the heliocentric model, you would say, wouldn't there be an eclipse every month? And the answer is, well, it's because the plane of the moon isn't quite lined up with the Earth and the sun, so the sunlight's slipping in underneath it or above it, and that's why they're so rare, which is utter nonsense. But but scientists they've identified thousands of planets now there's these planets, billions of miles away, thousands of light years away, are going in front of their star, their sun, and blocking the light to us. So all of the planets that they have claimed that they have discovered, they haven't seen them. They just saw a 0.1% of dip in light from a star that no one else can detect. Only they can detect it. But those happen to line up exactly on our ecliptic. If they were 100th of a degree out of line with us, the light would be going under, because of the vast distance, would be going underneath us. It's utter nonsense what people believe just because Neil deGrasse says it or some other scientist that we know nothing about says.
Right. And I think that people should really pay attention to the fact that NASA and JPL, folks like L. Ron Hubbard, Jack Parsons, they're occultists. And they played a major, major role in JPL and NASA. In fact, I think Jack Parsons has a crater named after him on the dark side, by the way. So anyway, Sophia, I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to get in the way of your questions here. What other questions do you have?
Well, I wanted to ask, what are the stars?
Jeran, go ahead.
Sure. Based on my opinion, they're lights in the sky. They are meant to keep track of time. They are also probably influential in each of our lives. That, I think astrology goes back, thousands of years. And when science came into play, and I'm talking scientism or science with a capital S, say around 15 or 1600, they quickly called astrology a pseudoscience and replaced it with their idea of astronomy. And the difference is that it doesn't make a lot of sense to people that stars, which if you go by the heliocentric model, the closest star to us, not counting the sun, is 25 trillion miles away, which is something none of us can even begin to comprehend that distance. Yet when you go outside and look above you, the stars are there. They're certainly not super close, but I don't think they're, anywhere near millions of miles, let alone billions or trillions. And obviously, something 25 trillion miles away probably isn't going to have a lot of influence on your life or, things like that. But if they are much closer, then it makes more sense that some of these things that astrology is taught would be true. And, I haven't done a whole lot of research into astrology, but I know a lot of people who have. And I'm a bookseller. We have a bookstore, and the number one most requested book is an astrology book that is supposedly supposed to help people play the stock market, and it's for sale right now on Amazon for $9,000. So that's pretty crazy. And I've had people offer me $4,000 or $5,000 if I can get a PDF version of the book. It's impossible to get. So there's something there. You don't see a book for sale for $9,000 if it's just bunk. So it tells me that something is going on with it, and it might be that these powerful elite, that they use the stars to kind of decide when they're going to do things, and maybe this book helps people play along with them or make money off these ebbs and flows that they perpetrate on the public through the Federal Reserve System. So it certainly seems to me that there's no way that stars are that far away. It doesn't make any sense at all, and it makes more sense to me that they're much closer. And I challenge anybody, go outside tonight and look at the stars, and just remember that the closest one is 25 trillion miles away, and I don't think people understand how far that really is and how ridiculous it is.
People don't understand what a trillion is. Mike, do you know how long 1 trillion seconds is?
No, how long?
31,000 years. Okay? So people have no idea. So let me just talk about how we see the stars. We're told that these stars that are like our sun, some bigger, some smaller, we're seeing them, these vast distances that make no sense. Our sun is 93 million miles away. It takes light about 8 minutes to get here. So we'll call that 8 light minutes. It's 400 times bigger than the moon. Is that correct, Jeran?
Yep.
And it's 400 times farther. Therefore, they're the same size. So at 8 light minutes away, this gigantic sun looks like the size of the moon. Let's double that distance, 16 light minutes. You know what? Let's 8 times that distance, a light hour. You wouldn't be able to see it at 15, 20 light minutes away. At a light hour, it's long gone. But we're seeing stars that are thousands of light years away. And I'm only talking about 1 light hour where our sun would be, you couldn't see it. Light traveling billions of miles forever without petering out is just a big lie that people buy with zero proof. It's not observable, testable, repeatable in any way. I mean, you can take I've done it with my boat where I've had a 2 million candlelight spotlight, and I'm trying to signal somebody just 7 miles away. They can't see it.
Yeah, my wife and I did a test of the ocean to test if there was any curvature in 4 miles. And the first time we tried it, we shot a pretty expensive $300 laser across the ocean 4 miles. And my wife was on the other side, and she called me and said, the beam is huge. And I said, what do you mean? I was thinking it was going to stay as a pinpoint. And she said, no, it's about 10 feet in diameter. So the beam had a divergence of 10 feet over 4 miles. So that makes me think about these stars that are these light sources trillions of miles away. How would it be that by the time they reach my eye that they have maintained their single point? That beam of light should have diverged, and if it went anywhere near the divergence of 10 feet and 4 miles, imagine the night sky would be completely washed out. We would have no nighttime. Think of the number of stars. I think they have it at 10 sextillion stars. And if light goes forever, never ending, and then the whole sky should be at night nothing but a white blanket of light. So the whole idea of them covering the entire sky, being 25 trillion miles at minimum, just doesn't make any sense when you look at it rationally.
Well, I just wanted to ask this. Somewhere I read that if space is a vacuum, how does it conduct light and radio waves that supposedly come to us, signals from these far off stars and planets?
You got me.
How do you even get thrust on a rocket?
I've for sure seen 2 tests just recently. ODD's got a good video about Mars, and then he shows 2 experiments that they did in a vacuum chamber. One showing that there was no combustion, so they tried to ignite propellant, and it just wouldn't light because, of course, there's no atmosphere to propagate that ignition or that flame to light something. And then the second test was to see if there was any thrust, and pretty incredible video footage because there's a feather hanging by a string, and he turns on a fan and you see the feather blow all around, and then they suck the air out of the chamber and turn on that fan that starts spinning, and it does nothing to the feather at all. So even though it's spinning, blowing air, that air is not traveling just 6 inches in front of the fan is where that feather was. So yeah, I personally don't think that there's any way that you could travel in space. I think that NASA says that they create a combustion inside the rocket and then it shoots out, and that causes the rocket to travel. I don't believe it.
Even if there was thrust in space, there's no way to control the pitch and roll where you would just be tumbling wildly. An airplane has to go a certain speed to maintain its stability.
Right. I mean, it has lift because it has resistance, right? I mean, the resistance of the air. My question is, we have all of these astronomers that are supposedly in these observatories. What the heck are they looking at if they're not looking at what they're telling us planets look like? What are they looking at?
They're looking at lights in the sky. If you look through a really good telescope, I had access to a great telescope when I was in college. You're seeing what looks like a light bulb. It's a self-illuminated, kind of looks spherical to me. Saturn looked very spherical. These things, we're told that they're seeing, thousands and millions and billions of miles, but they're not. They're just collecting light. And when you zoom in, you're zooming in on smaller and smaller and lighter things. You can put up a poster on the wall, a painting of a galaxy where you have big stars and little stars in the distance, and then get your zoom camera and you could zoom into it and then show that video, and people will say, yeah, that's zooming through space. No, it's not. It's just zooming in on smaller and smaller areas. So is the dome, is there a dome or whatever layer that is above us that's where everything resides. And when we get these giant telescopes, you're just zooming in closer and closer on smaller and smaller things.
Yeah, it's no different than a microscope. For some reason, people understand that if we put a leaf under a microscope and we look at it, that we're just seeing further into that little leaf there. We're just seeing it more magnified. That's all. We're not seeing past it. We're not seeing further. We're just seeing what's in front of us, but multiply magnified many times. When you look at the sky, for some reason, they have a different opinion when it's the same thing optically, that you're just seeing what's there zoomed in. You're not seeing further into the sky because you're looking through a telescope. People seem to understand that when it's talking about a microscope, but can't grasp that with a telescope.
Can I throw a what if in? So this existence under the dome describes the containment of this existence. My what if is, let's call this a dimension. We live in this thing that we call the third dimension. And outside of the containment is more dimensionality. But I've heard, and I've been trying to grapple with this and say, okay, fine, is this the way it is? We have a collective acceptance and understanding of 3D life. So our eyes interpret certain things to be hard surfaces, tables, chairs. This is the environment that we live in. And we all agree about colors. We may see them differently, but we call them this by the same name, however we see them. So this is a collective acceptance dimension, and it's described by and held within this dome. And under the dome is the dinner plate, and I don't know what's under that. But anyway, what if the stars were... Now, again, we have to speak in the language of dimension, so it's no longer the language of the third dimension, just the third dimension. What if the stars were openings? They were pliable, movable openings, pinpricks in that dome. And we're actually seeing glints, G-L-I-N-T-S, of greater dimensionality. And however they sweep around or move, I can't really explain, but because it's not a solid thing, this dome, in the way that the table, the desk I'm sitting on is a solid thing, it has a much bigger, much more pliable reality. It's not necessarily just purely physical. And so light, this thing that keeps us going, that we're nursed with from this thing that was put here called the sun, light exists ad infinitum in great power in ways that I can't even begin to imagine outside of the containment. And the stars they're just tiny little signs of that light.
I think that's a great point, Sophia. I've thought about that myself. I think, well, at least my way of saying this is that perhaps the stars, especially the planets, because they focus a lot on the planets, a lot of emphasis put on Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and so on. Perhaps they're gateways or portals. I mean, is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, there's some kind of dimensional opening, but they can't be described in a physical way, which is why they seem to move around, and we don't know what we're really looking at. We're looking out of this containment when we see stars, and we don't really know. We're not aware of that.
Yeah, it's like sitting in an analogy would be you're sitting in a very dark room, and that's the room you sit in all the time, and then there's a keyhole, and there's light coming out of that keyhole, right? So you're going to want to look through that keyhole, as small as it might be, to see what's on the other side, right?
Exactly. I mean, even, do you know in optics the pinhole effect?
Yes.
So if you do that, I'm doing it right now against the window. And when I was in, I don't even know, third grade or something, they were showing us this. You make a little triangle out of your thumb and your 2 forefingers, and you look through the pinhole. And even though you might reduce the size of the pinhole, the light waves that come through, they radiate out and they're round. And so you can't really diminish that at all. You can't diminish the physical property of that light. So you're already experiencing some kind of dimensionality in a cheesy way when you do the pinhole effect.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Jeran?
I totally agree. I think that there's, every bit of evidence I've seen when searching esoteric beliefs and the occultism, it talks everywhere about the planes of existence, and kind of what is described as this is the physical plane, which is like the densest plane. And, everybody from, Indian to Hermeticism, Gnosticism, they all talk of these different planes of existence. I think usually you've probably heard the number 7, that there's 7 planes and that they are above us. And absolutely, they could be pinpricks in that plane of existence to tell us it's there. I'm not sure. I've never been anywhere else but here. If I have been somewhere else, then I forgot it.
So I'll throw out the idea I've been looking into. I might have mentioned it to you a while ago, Mike, is that I believe that the stars, or I'm looking into the possibility that the stars are where, for lack of a better word, our souls are kept. And the stars are pieces of what we call the sun, the S-O-N or the S-U-N. You were talking about religions. There's a ton of religions that have the same story, and it's all an allegory for the sun. The sun, where it dies on December 20, in December, and then it rises 3 days later, and that's the solstice. That, we are having this physical experience here on Earth, and the stars above us are where our eternal soul is kept, for lack of a better word. It's the projector of our reality. And that's why astrology is such a powerful tool if you know how it works. It's just something that I resonate with. I have no proof of it, or, I don't know how you could possibly prove it, but somehow it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and going back to the astronomers and the observatories, they're clearly looking at something. And if they're not big balls in the sky, they're examining. Like the example, Jeran, that you used, where you put the leaf under the microscope. I mean, when you just hold a leaf out and you look at it, well, that's a leaf. But then when you put it under the microscope, then you're seeing very close up the nuances of that leaf. What does that leaf really look like? What does it really consist of? What is it made of? So, I think it's very possible that that's exactly what they're doing. They're looking at these stars, they're looking at the planets, and they're trying to get insight into what is the composition, what is the makeup, they could be sentient bodies, celestial bodies, right? There's a reason why they named them after gods. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions out there that, that are unanswered, and these are just thoughts that we're all sharing, right? We're not saying we have the answers to this stuff.
So the planets are all named after gods, but they're also called wandering stars. The stars themselves are fixed on a plane of their own, and the wandering stars are on, whether they're on one plane or different planes, moving through what we call the sky. That's how I see it.
I think what David said was really cool. I got a goosebump or two, so that's always a good sign. But when you look at a leaf under a microscope, you're actually looking at another structural world. Now you have to come up with new terms for what you're looking into. You're really not looking at, but you're looking into, I think. And when you take a telescope and you look out at the firmament, the stars, I don't even know if these guys know what they're looking at, because if they have been trained, and one of the best things David Weiss ever said to me, I have laughed about this so many times, astrophysics is a made-up science. And if that's the case, then these guys, they're thinking I'll just quickly say this, they're looking at solid objects, but actually they might be looking at the reverse, just the way they're looking into an opening rather than at something round.
A telescope is just a big microscope. You're doing the same thing. You could take your microscope and zoom into that leaf farther and farther and farther. It's the same thing that you're doing with the telescope. You're not going vast distances. You're just zooming in on a surface of some sort. I don't know if it's solid, energetic, frozen. I don't know the answer.
But imagine that we're looking at that leaf and somebody convinces you that the cell that we're looking at is actually a place you can go and land on. It's basically what they're doing with space, right? I mean, they're just taking a little thing that they're able to see on their telescope and say, you can go there. And I'm sure you guys have heard that there's a guy, I can't think of his name right now, that found that basically a numeric code in space, that he found this, basically it's a computer code that makes up the universe. And I tend to think that that could possibly be what's going on. And like you said, it being made up, I look at people like Neil deGrasse that's got a PhD as an astrophysicist, and really all he's done is done a good job at memorizing words out of a book. He's never been to space. He's never touched space. He's never experimented with space. He just is really good at repeating what's in a book that told him what the truth is. I'm not really sure if those are the kind of people we want to have PhDs. I mean, would you want to give an MD to a doctor that had never seen a human? Probably not a good idea. It's the same kind of thing, that these guys are experts in what I consider to be a big story, a big lie.
Well, many of them are theoretical physicists. So they have the word theoretical in front of them, which means that they're operating in theory. And that's what a lot of people also have to understand, that they're talking in terms of theory. So these are not facts, these are theories. And, and theories can be debated and theories should be debated. The other thing is, just quickly, Richie from Boston, I was watching a video he did recently. He was talking about Bill Nye, and he said that Bill Nye is actually a mechanical engineer. Is that true?
I thought he was a comedian.
Yeah, I mean, he was with MTV or Disney or something, and then he was saying that he's actually a mechanical engineer. And I was kind of laughing as I was watching Richie's video, because I'm thinking to myself, this guy's on TV. He's put, front and center stage. He's some kind of scientist.
Yeah, in that video where somebody asks him, could the Earth be flat? His excuse is, go to the east coast of the United States and look across the ocean and tell me why we can't see Spain, which is a ridiculous thing for anybody to say, let alone a scientist, because we know that anything going away from you, take a car, after 200 yards, the car will disappear. It's gotten too small for you to see. So when you're looking across 3,500 miles of ocean, anything on the other side of the ocean has become so small you would never see it. So for him to say that, it just makes me think that they've never considered anything outside of their own beliefs and their own ideas. And that's the opposite of science. You have these guys going around saying the great thing about science is that we're so skeptical and we look at every different thing and we always make sure that we're not falling for our own delusions. But they really honestly have already assumed that everything that they believe is the truth, and anything coming from outside that is nonsense. And scientists saying, look across the ocean and you should be able to see Spain if the Earth is flat, is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, they're ignoring certain laws of physics when they say that, right? And so when you're talking, all of you, and I'm sitting here thinking and frowning, I would say that these people have developed a language, and each of them gets to develop a subsection of the language, and they have the monopoly over publications. They have the best places in the libraries and the encyclopedias where they can put their parts of the story that they've developed, and they just take off on this story. They love to indulge themselves in aspects of the story and keep refining it. It's almost like if I were to say, okay, let's the four of us write a novel about, and I laid out a basic plot, and I said, Jeran, go and develop this part of the plot, David, develop this part, Mike, and I will develop this other part. That's all that they're doing. They're just developing parts of a story. And they are talking a language, and they don't want to listen to our story in our language.
Well, they don't want to listen to our story, Sophia, because I'm speaking, from my own perspective here, is because this is a religion. It's a theology for them. So they're imposing their beliefs on us. And so that's how they work it. That's why they will never accept this. They will never accept our view of anything, because they're not coming at it from a science perspective. They're coming at it from a religious perspective, if you will.
Yeah,
Right.
It's dogma. They're not imposing their beliefs, Mike, necessarily. They're imposing their story. There are some of them that believe that story, I'm sure, because they don't know any different. And then there are others of them, I'm sure, they know the story is fake.
Yeah.
I think it goes a lot further than just, where we live. I think that if you really look at the story that science tells about the age of the Earth, that the stories that they tell are really stories. The more I look into different aspects, I really try and go and research and dig to the bottom of, the more I get really frightened like you said, Sophia, I frowned the other day. I really wanted to see the idea of chromosomes and how that works, and the whole idea of and go look into it, and you'll see. Basically, they've told us a story that works well in a book. It works well when you talk about it. But if you're talking about the actual looking at chromosomes through a microscope, it's not at all the kind of science that you would expect for something to be considered scientific. In fact, like 1921, the guy said that we had 48 chromosomes, and it wasn't until 37 years after that that they realized it was 2 less than that. Well, that should tell you that if you're talking about a microscope and being able to actually see something, that it shouldn't take you 37 years to realize that you just miscounted something. But it goes so deep and so far into all the different sciences that really they've come up with ways to tell a story. You said it perfectly, that we have to believe, and at least religion admits that it's a religion, that science has got a way with calling things fact and saying that things are tested and experimented on. And it's just not the case. I mean, go try and look up a double helix DNA. You know, we've all seen the drawing of the double helix DNA code. Go try and see an image of that, or a photo of somebody who's seen that through a microscope. It's not what people think. It comes out of a computer. And I don't think people understand that you have to put in data into the computer in order for whatever it spits out. So when we get these pictures of galaxies, or we get the picture of the double helix code, or we get the picture of chromosomes, somebody had to tell the computer what to output. And then when they put in different data, they get that output again. But those things aren't coming out. It's not what people see.
Excel does the same thing with data. You can tell it to put out a graph, all different kinds of graphs. You throw in some numbers and it makes a different graph. It's beautiful.
Right. Yeah, so that's a very good point, Jeran. So you're saying, I mean, it's based upon inputs. So if the person who's putting the inputs in has a predetermined objective or outcome, then they're going to put inputs into the computer program or into Excel that's going to spit out exactly what it is that they want as an outcome.
Right. I mean, especially when you're talking about, space, that these satellites, or the Hubble Space Telescope, it's transmitting whatever it's seeing to a computer, and the computer takes all that information and outputs an image that people then apply colors to, and they show us these beautiful pictures and everything. But that's not what the actual telescope is seeing. That, that's exactly right. That it's whatever was inputted into the computer as a kind of catch-all, saying if this comes through, output this. If this comes through, output this. So I think, and it's very easy to convince people that what you're talking about is the truth. I'm not somebody who believes that every scientist is lying and that they're all deceiving us. These people went to school, so they are very well versed in whatever their field is, and they really believe it. It's just like the poor scientists or engineers that build these things at NASA. They're very well versed in them. They build great satellites, and then when they hand it off, and then the next thing they know, they see on TV a rocket go up into space, and they think that their satellite's aboard there. They go to work on Monday, and they get printouts showing that their satellite is exactly where they think it is. It's returning the exact data that they expected. So they would never second guess the whole deal. They don't understand or don't even consider the fact that all it would take is somebody on the other side of the computer telling the computer to output those things. And when you're as mathematical as all those things have to be, it can just be pre-programmed in the computer. So when we see the Mars lander go to Mars and this rover's out there, it's very easy for them to mathematically come up with a code that returns exactly what the scientists would be expecting. And occasionally you throw in a little bump in the road, right? You make it return its data 45 seconds late so that the scientist kind of freaks out for a second. Then the data comes through and they're like, whew, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't get my return tone. And it just makes them I feel bad for them because they're very smart people who are doing a great job. It just so happens somebody at the very top is probably not sending those satellites anywhere where they think they're going.
There's a patent for satellite radio to how to fake it to make it look just like a satellite signal. There's an actual patent that shows, they can test it to make it look like it's using satellites by using ground towers. It's nonsense what they're telling us with satellites.
One of the things that I've always say to folks is that when we talk about scientists, PhDs, and all these people, that they could be very, very smart people, and many of them are very, very smart people. But the thing is that They have majored in and they have gotten degreed in whatever it is that they were allowed to know. So there's a whole, in my view, there's a whole suite of information about our existence, even about physics, that I believe is completely off the table. It's just that's someplace else. There's other people that control that and deal with that. And that many of these scientists and these physicists and these PhDs, they are essentially, unbeknownst to them, they're doing the work of the controllers by going out and saying, okay, so I'm going to play back and I'm going to major in whatever it is that I majored in or got degreed in, and I'm going to work with that. And the thing is that, to me, they're working with a subset of the total pool of information, if you will, the total pool of knowledge. And so that's where they get trapped. It's because, let me just, a real quick one here. I don't want to take up too much time, but I have some friends that went to the climate conferences out in Paris, and they were talking to some of the scientists that were there, climate scientists, and the questions that were posed to these scientists was, well, when you factor in all of your modeling with climate, do you ever factor in the spraying? Do you ever factor in that geoengineering is already taking place? And the vast majority of these scientists had no clue what the activists were asking them, which says that, they don't look at the sky. They don't see what we're seeing. So the point I'm trying to make is that many times they're in a bubble. They're in a silo, and they never look left or right. There's no peripheral vision. It's very compartmentalized. They're just focused on whatever it is that they're working on, and that is it. Anything outside of that belongs to somebody else to go look at. And I think that that's a big, big piece of the problem. It's a huge piece of the problem.
There's also, I'm thinking of the story of the little boy who just went to the ice skating rink, and he's finished with his little excursion, and his father is there, and his father is taking off his skates and putting his shoes on because they're going to go home. And the little boy sees the candy machine, and he goes, I want a candy bar. And his father says, no. And he goes, I want a candy bar. And his father says, no. And he goes, why? And the father says, the machine is broken. And the little boy goes, why? And the father says, because I say so. That's it.
Yeah.
And these people, when you said, Mike, they are following the orders of the controllers, they have become the little boy.
Yeah.
And they cannot hear anything else except that the machine is broken because someone said so, and that's the end of their world. They have to stick with what they have studied, which is all artificial, but they have invested so much time and money in it, and they do not have the ego strength to start taking that apart now.
Well, and if they step outside the box, there's punishment, right? So if they do decide that they're going to be free thinkers and maybe just kind of like explore a little bit here to the left, a little bit to the right, as soon as they start talking out of step with the mainstream storyline, they're going to have their careers ruined.
That's happened to numerous people about dinosaur research, finding dinosaur bones that had carbon-based material in them, and knowing that that kind of material doesn't last longer than 10, 20, 30,000 years. And when they bring it to the attention of their superiors, that they usually end up losing their jobs in wanting to have it carbon date tested or anything like that, because of course carbon dating only returns less than 50,000 years. So that that happens everywhere. And same thing with some of these places that get the satellite data. I've gotten a few emails from people who have tried to question these people at the different universities who put up these websites that have satellite data that comes back to them, and they ask, how do you get your data? And every time these guys describe a multiple hop system to where it's going to the NOAA first, and then it's being decrypted, and it's being pixelated, and then sent to them, and then they post it on their site. But the site certainly makes it sound like this is the University of Wisconsin's data from some satellite, but it goes to the NOAA first, goes through a little several hop system, and then they get the data that they put out. So those people are never going to assume that they're getting lies. They're just going to assume they're getting the actual data from the satellites. But there's nobody that can ensure that that's actually what's going on.
That's right. And Jeran, recently you had a whistleblower on your show, and you spoke to this lady.
Yeah.
And what was your takeaway? Because I listened to that show. I thought she sounded very credible.
Yeah, absolutely. And she also, if you go to that video, you can look at the first comment. I pinned it up at the top, and she felt bad after because she saw all the comments from people that said that she was faking it or that she was a fraud.
And she worked for NASA, right?
Yeah, and people just need to think that, what would I have or what would she have to gain by her coming out and saying that? Basically, she worked for NASA as a contractor, but she worked at Edwards Air Force Base. And she worked there for like 15 years under different programs, and she had a couple interesting stories, one of them being that she worked next to the photo lab and that she had overheard two of the photo technicians laughing about the moon landings, that they couldn't believe that anybody ever believed that people went to the moon. And the other thing was one of her coworkers at JPL had told her that the Earth was flat. And over the course of a couple days, this is, over 10 years ago. And at the time, she worked for NASA and thought both people were crazy. The people saying that we never went to the moon and the people telling her that the Earth was flat. And she just decided to go public because over the last 2-3 years, she's come to the conclusion that the Earth is flat. She's a flat earther now. And she just wanted to voice some of the things that she thought were peculiar about her job. But the way she describes the non-disclosure agreements that she had to sign, and she said, anything you ask me, I'll let you know if I can talk about it. And if I can't, because I did sign several non-disclosure agreements, I'll just tell you I can't talk about those topics. But she said basically that's what they do, is they call you into an office and they tell you to sign it, you sign it, and then they give you a briefing. So that scares me, because it would be very easy for them to call a group of 20 people in and sit them down, and then you have them sign a paper, and then you tell them whatever you need to tell them, that the Earth is flat, that they're going to be working on some deception, whatever it is. And you really put those people in a predicament where they can literally not say anything. If they tried, who knows what the threats are, but it's certainly jail time and fines to start with. And number two, you never know, with the media controlled as they are, you don't even know if you ever did whistleblow or come out and say something that it would even make the nightly news. It might get squashed and you get squashed. And there's tons of examples of that with NASA, with people speaking out against them and quickly losing their life. It's happened numerous times. So I think that's kind of a good enough threat for most people. So I was really proud of her to come out and say what she said, because she also says she had friends that still work with NASA. And when they hear that, they're not going to be real happy with her saying what she said. But she said nothing that she admitted to was ever protected by any non-disclosure agreement. So pretty brave lady.
You say that's enough of a threat to keep most people quiet, and I completely agree. It keeps 99% of the people quiet, and the other ones that it doesn't keep quiet are the ones that get killed. So they cover it 100%.
Can I ask a question here? When you sign a contract, you're really signing your straw man is the one that's making the contract, your corporate self. So there must be a lifetime term for this non-disclosure agreement. In other words, whatever you do here, you will never discuss for the rest of your life. There's no other term on that, is there?
No, she said every non-disclosure agreement that she signed, they last indefinitely.
So lifetime. Yeah. Because I think from now on, people should be advised that every time they sign their name on anything, they put that without prejudice, UCC, whatever it is.
All rights reserved. Yeah.
All rights reserved, right. And then the code section that pertains to that. I should have said this better. I could run and grab it and tell you. But, yeah, people should be very careful about what they sign, because that's what gets them in a pickle. And if you can put a term on what you sign or put some, control on it, then you can talk later.
Well, major corporations do this, as you know, Sophia. I mean, when you get hired by a major corporation, especially the large multinationals, as part of your hiring process and, accepting the job is you essentially sign a non-disclosure and a confidentiality agreement. And part of that contract that you sign says that if you conduct yourself in any shape, way, or form that they deem that's detrimental to the company, you could be terminated. So that leaves the question open in the mind of the person, like, well, what exactly is the behavior that you're talking about? That's intentionally left wide open and very vaguely defined so that, they have the upper hand and they have the leverage. So if they decide that for whatever reason they don't want you around anymore, they don't like you, you can just gone. They get rid of you. So I would assume that places like NASA, JPL, and so on, that's got to be 10 times the level of scrutiny that they put into these confidentiality agreements and these non-disclosures.
Mike, were you ever in the military at all?
A long time ago, yep.
So, and maybe you can help me with, I wonder what, kind of the oaths that they take, because another thing I find interesting is that these astronauts are all mostly military, and the ones that they call civilians are former military, which I just have a problem with. Why do we call them civilians? Like, for instance, if you look it up, Neil Armstrong is considered the only civilian who went to the moon on Apollo 11. Both Mike Collins and Buzz Aldrin were military at the time, but he's considered a civilian. However, he was in the military for many years before he went to NASA. So I'm always wondering, what is the kind of oaths that they've already taken that maybe they're able to use these people as pawns in this whole game. And I don't know if you've looked into the whole Marconi scientist deaths conspiracy theory that is from the mid 80s. I think it was that there was 25 British-based Marconi scientists and engineers that all died, who were all working on a Stingray torpedo project. But it was the whole idea of Star Wars that is better known as Star Wars, the United States Strategic Defense Initiative. And they all died under mysterious circumstances. And, that's the kind of thing that, would open anybody's eyes, that you've got 25 people that die in 8 years due to mysterious circumstances. But maybe you can just tell us if you ever took any kind of oath like that, or know of any oath that they give military people, that maybe that's part of it.
I remember that, and I'm going back a long time ago now, but I remember that when you sign up to go into the military, I by the way, I was in the Air National Guard, and I did a 4-year stint, that in the agreement that you sign, it says that you can be recalled at any time, even after you do your 4 years, right? So let's say, you're in and you get out. The thing is, I remember very clearly that even though I was out, I wasn't really out, because if they wanted to tap me and bring me back, they could do that. Now, the other thing is, with many of these guys, Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Mike Collins, all those guys, we're really talking about Freemasonry. We're talking about fraternal orders. So I think that is really the glue that keeps it together. That they have an allegiance and they take oaths, as you know, Jeran and David and Sophia. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know already.
Right.
But those oaths trump everything. And so I think that's really what's at play. I think that once a Mason, always a Mason. And and if you open your mouth and you decide you're going to divulge things, well, then Freemason or not, you're going to be taken care of. You're going to be taken out. You might disappear, whatever. Your career will be ruined. So I think that's what holds the glue together, is the fraternal orders, the secret societies that these guys all belong to.
And where that might begin with, too, is I think it's incredible that they all were Boy Scouts. Unless it's much more popular than I knew growing up. I didn't know anybody who was in the Boy Scouts. But if you look up all the astronauts, they all were Boy Scouts first, then became these Masons. So I don't know if that's like a grooming area. Maybe you guys have been in the Boy Scouts or know something about them. I don't know much, but I do know that they seem to be a proving ground or a grooming area for future deceivers.
Yeah, I don't know. I was in the Cub Scouts and the Webelos after that, but I never got to the Boy Scouts. I quit, but I don't recall anything nefarious or anybody. My father was a scoutmaster, and Dad wasn't in any kind of secret society. So, and I don't remember anything going on where they were trying to coalesce a group of people to get them to come together for some other purpose. So I don't know. So that I don't know.
Well, it's joining the club. I mean, you got to be in the club. The club is a sprawling octopus. And if you're not part of the club, then you're one of the people who will destroy the world if you get too active. I wrote down a tagline that I heard on TV. They were talking about some movie, I don't know which movie, but this is how they described what the movie was about. Through the mystic arts, to reshape reality and defend the world from those who will destroy it. They always put out there that somebody's going to destroy the world, and that cleverly points away from them, and they're going to reshape reality and save the world. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're reshaping reality. And we're sitting here thinking they're helping us and they're going to save us from some force that's going to ruin our lives when it's them.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's what they do. And they put themselves up on the pedestal and they're looking out for the betterment of humankind. They're looking out for you, right? I don't think so.
Right. And the masses, I love this image that was created for me by the last chapter of Mark Devlin's book, Musical Truth. The image of people lining the streets of London 6 deep, cheering and screaming and waving plastic flags to greet the Queen as she rides by. And they love cheering for the people that are destroying their lives.
That's what people do. They cheer on the authority. They cheer on the ruling class. You know, it's a minority of people that do not. The number of dissenters that actually see, they push the curtain aside and actually see what's behind the curtain. You know, the four of us, as an example, we are a very, very, very minute percentage of the population that does that. Everybody else is either apathetic, they don't care, or they're cheering it on.
Which is really sad, because when you look at it, when we have questions about somebody like NASA who's taking taxpayers' money, is you would think that as a human species, that when a bunch of us have questions, that the other humans would realize the benefit of turning around to NASA and saying, hey, these guys have questions. Can you prove this, this, or this? Instead, they turn at us and argue on behalf of the people we're saying that are deceiving them. It makes no sense at all, because there would be nothing wrong if they turned and said, hey, NASA, prove this stuff. But somehow they've been convinced that they will be considered idiots or they'll be considered morons. And it's more important for them to turn and call us names rather than just solve the problem right off the bat by joining us and saying, yeah, NASA, prove these things. And if they prove that they are telling the truth, then great. Then we all feel better because we all got closer to the truth, and we all feel comfortable that we trusted NASA because now we've proven that they're telling the truth. But we can't even get there because we're fighting through the crowds of people that love NASA, love everything about them, and wouldn't dare question them. That's pretty sad.
It is sad.
Yeah, they're cheering on the ball Earth and the giant, enormous universe full of infinite numbers of galaxies and their own infinitesimal status therein. That's what they want. It's the equivalent of having somebody stand in front of you saying, close your eyes, open your mouth, pinch your nose, swallow this, what I've got on this spoon for you, without ever checking into their background.
Yeah, they're running around saying, yay, I love being meaningless. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to.
That's their plan, to have us believe that there is no meaning. And once you adopt that as your mindset, you become powerless. And that is the whole thing that they're doing with everything that they're doing with the ball Earth lie, with, the chemtrails, the GMOs, the fluoride. They're dumbing us down. They're keeping us scared in a low vibration and having us like, yeah, what does it matter anyway? I might as well drink and, watch the game and that's how they control us.
Well, I was at the beach once and I was wearing one of my activist t-shirts. I don't really know which one it was. Maybe it was Who's Spraying the Sky. It's for sale on my website, avatarproducts.com. Anyway, some woman, an older woman who was reading, she had gray hair and glasses, and she was sitting there, and she kind of waved me over, and she asked what the meaning of my shirt was, and I explained. We got into a long discussion, which lasted a couple of hours. Turned out she was a Christian Scientist, and she told me, what we believe in Christian Science is that humanity is under a spell. And I said, what? And she explained, a spell. They're under a spell. And I gathered from what she was saying that people were in a trance. And you had to get out of that trance, or you weren't going to be able to have the life you were meant to have.
Do you wonder sometimes, Sophia, that even though we think like we have enough discernment that we've stepped off the hamster wheel, that even for what we know, we're still in a trance, that we still, there's just so much that we don't know. You ever give any thought to that? I know I do. I think to myself, I like to think of myself as aware and awakened and everything else, but am I really?
You know, Mike, I think about this element of choice, and I haven't thought about it a lot, only occasionally, and I started to think about it again yesterday. Because every time you do something, you can really make a choice about whether you want red or blue, whether you're going to go right or left. I mean, I was thinking about conception and the fallopian tubes. There are two, and when these millions of sperm go rushing up to be the first one to penetrate the egg, they come to a fork in the road. And a bunch of them are going to go up the wrong fork. They're not even going to be in the race anymore, and they don't even know it. So every fork in the road, we have a choice. And if you can make that choice consciously, you really are in control of your life. And if you think creatively when you are at those forks, and you start to be discerning within yourself, instead of just blindly stumbling along, clutching your plastic flag so you can get to be one of the 6 deep in the crowd and cheer on the Queen, we have the ability to maneuver in a conscious way, even if we might not know everything.
No, that's a great point. It's well said. I mean, because you have to start someplace, right? I mean, breaking out, I said before, you don't know what you don't know, but, there's a lot of stuff that you can start clearing off the table so that you clear that path out a little bit so that, it makes seeking the truth maybe just a little bit easier. You were going to say something, David?
No, it was me. I have a
Jeran, sorry.
7-minute promo video that I just downloaded the other day from ESA, which is, the European Space Agency. And it's a 7-minute promo about going to space and look at all that we've done. And the final caption, the final wording on the screen as it is done says, "Join us on board this new reality we've built," which I think just says a ton. I mean, they're telling you flat out that this is a reality that they've built. It's not a reality. Nobody will never see space, will never travel to space. It's simply, we'll give money for it. We definitely are getting our taxes taken, from us, and that's what's funding them. And it's pretty sad that, I ask people all the time, NASA gets $50 million a day. Tell me one thing that they've provided for humanity. It's pretty sad that you have to really search to find somebody who has one thing they can tell me.
Well, they have provided for humanity a bunch of malarkey, but that's what humanity wants, apparently, and likes.
Jeran, they've done scientific experiments. They're very busy up there.
Yeah. It's going in circles. Absolutely. And they're going to colonize Mars, which is really important to go somewhere where we can't live without a suit on, and there's no water and there's no way to grow food. And we got to get there because this place that has everything you could ever want, that they are running into the ground every way they can. We really need to go do that to other places, I guess, huh?
Well, the Trump administration just gave NASA a bunch of money for Mars exploration. I almost fell out of my chair. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
It's unbelievable. The question is Trump blind like 99% of the rest of the country, or is he one of the players?
I think he's in the club. There's no way he gets to where he got, David, without him knowing, certain things. And there's something going on that has to continue to go on.
There's so many smart people or successful people that are, doing very well for themselves and educators that believe in NASA. They believe we went to the moon. They believe the Earth is a spinning ball flying through infinite space.
But I asked the same question about JFK and the moon. I mean, did JFK know that the moon was not terrestrial, that you can't land on it?
I think that is the secret of secrets. What we're talking about is the foundation for everything that they do. So I think it's very, very few people who know it. I don't think Kennedy knew that we couldn't go. And I don't think that Trump knows anything about NASA. Do I think that he's in the group? Yeah, probably. I mean, you can't, like you said, Mike, you can't be that rich and famous and powerful without having,
being in the club
with those guys. Right. You've definitely stepped on people's throats, and you've, probably cheated and lied quite a few times to get there. So yeah, he's definitely part of the club, but I'm not sure if he's part of the club that understands the space lie. I think he signed that bill thinking that, he's giving NASA money to continue doing science and exploring space. It just so happens that they're not doing science and there is no space.
Oh man. Anything else, Sophia?
That's pretty much it. I mean, we've been on for a good couple of hours, and it's been greatly enjoyable, and I've learned a lot. I've frowned a lot. I've thought pretty hard throughout these 2 hours.
It'll just get worse, to be honest with you. I hate to tell you that. But it's, and people always think that I'm trying to prove the Earth to be flat, and actually, I'm actually doing the opposite. That I want to know right now if I'm wrong, and the more I research, the more I'm just finding the same old things. In fact, I'm finding new things every day that just continue to show exactly what we're saying. Some of the quotes from some of these great scientists of all time who were saying exactly what was going to happen. They knew exactly what was going on. And, it's pretty sad that we all got suckered into this. It's just, how do we get the hell out now?
Yeah.
People, it's like like a Morpheus in the Matrix. Some people aren't ready to wake up because, when you realize any of these conspiracies, it takes you all the way to flat Earth, and that your whole life has been a lie. Not your fault. You were indoctrinated into it, but it's a tough awakening. But I'd rather be awake and alone, or with just a few friends, than a zombie walking, sleeping, and not knowing where I am.
You guys, I just want to mention this. There's two ways to look at the glass, half empty or half full. And when I first was introduced to this flat Earth concept, I actually went to the beach to test it out, to see the flat horizon myself and various other properties, physical properties that had been described to me as being able to determine with your own eyes. Come on. So here I am walking on the beach, and I'm seeing all these people, and they're collecting shells, and they're talking, and I'm feeling so sorry for them. And I'm looking at each of them and wondering, does he know the Earth is flat? Do they know? I really wonder. And feeling sorry for them, but at the same time, I just felt exhilarated and free. I felt happy that I was free of that mythology and that somebody had swept it away from me and cleaned my windshield, so to speak. And I think that people who are picking up on the enormity of this other reality, not the reshaped reality that has been built for us, it's a very freeing thing. It should make you want to jump up and down and throw your arms up in the air and say, woohoo, this feels good, right? We don't need to feel alone. We often do, but the fact is it feels good to be relieved of all these nooses around our consciousness.
I agree, Sophia, because I've always said that it's cleared so many things off the table for me. There were things that I used to spend time researching on. Colonizing the moon, Mars, aliens, UFOs, space invasion, asteroids, planet Nibiru, and so on, all of this stuff.
All gone now.
It's all gone. It's all gone. So you get all that crap off the table. So what happens now? Now I have the time to focus on, to narrow the aperture and really zone in and have focus on things that I really should be focused on, because all that other stuff was just distractions. That's all stuff that's hanging out there to make you wander aimlessly through the woods and make you think actually that you're doing something. That's the really sad part about it, is you actually think that you're doing deep research and you're understanding something when in reality, it's all make-believe. It's all make-believe. It's like researching Peter Pan, right? So in any case, I absolutely agree with you that it's very freeing, it's very liberating, and I don't make any excuses for it. For quite a time, I really held back saying anything to anybody about being a flat earther, because it was so many people were just so vicious, and they would just attack. There was no civil discourse whatsoever, but I've gotten to the point now, and I have probably been there now for probably the last 9 to 10 months or so, where I just don't care. It's who I am, it's where I'm at, and I'm going to talk about it openly and freely. Too bad.
I don't know if you guys have heard the idea that somebody was throwing around, that to tell people on April Fool's Day to go ahead and post a bunch of links to different channels in Flat Earth conversations or Flat Earth videos, and then say, I'm now a flat earther. And this way they can get it out there to all their family and friends, and then they can use the excuse of, oh no, it was April Fool's. But, imagine the clicks that people will get just by saying that. But I recommend looking at the Vegan Warrior. You know who he is?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, he put out a recent video that's called "I'm No Longer a Flat Earther." For 25 minutes, it is the first 25 minutes of that video is so inspiring. It's awesome to hear. He basically goes through this idea of not being a flat earther anymore because he says the flat earth was a word that was put on us by the globe, and it was intended from the very start. He talks about it like it's the Super Bowl game, and you've got the globe earth against the flat earth, but they've got their stands full of people. They've got the best team. They've got every star player, and we're over here with nobody in our stands and really nobody that's a great player on the team. But the way he goes through it and then just gets really inspiring, talking about the fact that he's a realist and that there's no reason why we should have to bow down to them and say, oh, because you have all these esoteric ideas and these metaphysical beliefs, that we're talking in reality, that we have the team. It's just a great video. I definitely recommend it because you might watch the first 5 minutes and be like, why did Jeran make me watch this? That's what my wife said, at least. And then after it gets going, I mean, at the end of that, you're like ready to go take on the world. I just thought it was an awesome video.
Send me the link, Jeran, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah, all of the topics that we talked about, I'll give you the links to all the videos that relate to them in order. So anyone that's listening, that just go through the show notes and you'll see some great videos explaining in much better detail what we're talking about.
Sophia?
Yeah, no, I think that we're wrapping up, and we've aired our views in a very creative and fulfilling way, and I just hope that people will have resonance with this.
It was a great show. Whose idea was it?
David.
Sophia's.
No, David.
Jeran's.
It wasn't mine.
See, we're just batting the ball.
No, it really was. I enjoyed it a lot. It's always great to talk to people who just, critical thinkers. So I'm glad that I participated.
Yeah, me too. I think it's something that we need to do more often. Or, I know if you know John LeBon, I mean, he used to have that good show that he stopped doing, but it was good that they were challenging. I think that we kind of got away from that. We got to challenge these things and remind us some questions that people have that aren't answered, so that we go out and answer them. Because there's a big Christian community in the flat Earth that. I don't mind. That's great, but they also are people who I don't think are doing a lot of research or experiments. They're just they're on board because it matches the Bible, and we need people to help. It's the globe took thousands of people over hundreds of years to build their globe map, and if we're ever going to get anything like a flat Earth map or an idea of how it all works, it's going to take a lot of people who want to know the truth, not just tune into YouTube every day to get the truth handed to them,
We don't have all of the answers, as we said earlier in the show, but if you're new to the flat Earth subject, the way you're looking at it is it's ridiculous. Of course, we live on a spinning ball, but if you take the time to look into it, what you will find out that the spinning ball is far more ridiculous than what you ever thought the flat Earth was, and that the flat Earth has a preponderance of evidence for Bob that just goes on and on and on. We don't have all the answers, but the evidence it's undeniable at this point.
Yeah, we all believe the globe model. I mean, it's not like we went to flat Earth school when we were kids. We were taught what everybody else was taught, and we had to come around. I mean, it wasn't an easy thing for me when I first got introduced to it. I thought it was just absolutely ridiculous that we were talking about the flat Earth, and it took me time to come around.
You say that we were being taught would be, hey, we live here and this is an experiment and this is an observation, but we weren't taught. We were indoctrinated. We were told, here's the ball. You live here. No questions asked. Move along. Nothing to see here. So,
I'm going to read a quote from Michael Tellinger. And I wrote this down from his October video in which he was discussing his coming around to the flat Earth model. And this isn't about the flat Earth, it's about electrons, but there's a little nugget here that I like, and it reflects what's happened with us on this show. So he said, an electron is not a physical object. It is just a manifestation of coherent resonance that keeps moving around. And this is why they can't pin an electron down, and they find it so difficult to prove the existence of things like electrons and other subatomic particles. But the point being that we experienced coherent resonance amongst ourselves. And hopefully that will be experienced and enjoyed by others who listen to this. And we are not trying to prove anything. We are expressing coherent resonance about our questions and the way in which we were raised and indoctrinated. Hi, this is Sophia letting you know about my store, avatarproducts.com. It began as a DVD store in the old days, but I've switched it over to products that I've found. Some of them I've actually thought of myself, and people have formulated them for me, biochemists with labs, and I am selling now a lot of body remediation items that you might enjoy as you discover your own body getting a little older, accumulating a few more toxic materials and compounds. Our cells get challenged later in life. They need a little help doing their housekeeping. So avatarproducts.com, if you look under the Health tab, the Body and Posture tab, there's a Sun and Skin tab. You'll find things like a fantastic argan oil soap, argan oil itself, magnesium products that are delivered through the skin, and iodine, seat cushions that keep you straight at your desk when you're constantly looking at your computer for more and more alternative information. Anyway, avatarproducts.com. Please go there. Please have a look. Definitely use the downloaded PDF form for sending in a check. Let's support each other and not enrich the banks. You can always mail your order in. And I thank you very much for your support.